Well, we are back again. Um, First video that I put out talking like this was just my thoughts on some things in response to what I'd seen in a YouTube video. Today, I'd rather talk about some of the things I've been hearing. Every year around the workplace, conversations change. In the spring, it's about turkey hunting and everybody's plans and their new shotguns or loads or whatever. This time of year, it's deer season's coming up. Nobody squirrel hunts anymore. Very few do around here anyway. So mainly it's deer season coming in, unless they put in for the elk draw on the eastern end of the state. But the big talk right now is upcoming deer season, whether it's bow season when it was coming in, or crossbow coming up this weekend, or the first black powder season, rifle season, second black powder season, what have you. And I've noticed a trend over the years, and it's market drives it. Capitalism's a good thing, I guess, and I'm guilty of some of it. Everybody's talking about their new deer gun, or what they would like to buy for their new deer gun, or the loads that they've discovered for their old deer gun. And it strikes me as kind of funny. I've watched it over the years. I'm 54 years old, so I've seen it for 30 plus years easily. Almost 30 in the same workplace, around some of the same people over time. And I think we're getting lazy. Used to, anywhere you look, people were hunting with a 30-30, whether it was a Winchester or a Marlin. It was 30-30. If they were with the in crowd, it was the 260 came along, the 7mm 08 came along, and everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. The Winchester short magnums came along. Some of them that may or may not have had identity crisis got into the ultra mags. We're talking about shooting deer, white-tailed deer. Around here, they're not as big as they are up in the northern parts of the country. They're not near as heavy as a mule deer are out west. You're looking at 75-pound, yearlings up to, I've killed 200-pound plus bucks, but does 100, 140, 150 pounds a big one. And I think we've fallen into a trap where this goes to the lazy part. We forgot how to be deer hunters, and we've become deer shooters. I don't know if it's due to the faster paced lifestyle that we all live. We don't have time to go out and pattern a particular deer, pattern a particular herd of deer. It's that instant gratification that everybody's chasing these days. Even some of the older guys that I've worked with, that ain't necessarily just the younger bunch. It's not a generational thing. It's a societal thing. You don't have to have a rifle shooting, a medium bore center fire rifle, that's shooting 3,000, 3,200 feet per second to kill a deer. Some of my most memorable hunts have been with, slow, simple, down to earth, back to yesteryear type weaponry. I love 45 Colt. I've mentioned that before. Handgun hunting's a blast for me, anyway. Bow hunters kind of know what I guess it's the same mentality that traditional bow hunters hold. My son, we've lost him back in the spring. He's gone now. He's gone home to be the Lord. But he always shot a longbow, and that was his favorite type of archery equipment, was a longbow. And I'm not plugging any brand. He saved his money up and bought a Bear Montana longbow, and that was his gig. He used to joke with guys at work that asked him why he hunted with a longbow, and he says, I got good enough I could take the training wheels off of it, which tickled me to pieces. But he thoroughly enjoyed ribbing them boys. He wasn't shooting, 50, 60 yards like some of these guys are with their Matthews and their PSEs and Hoyts and all this, but it got him back closer to nature. It made him slow down and enjoy the simple things. And the same applies to gun hunters. We can go out and drop money on a new 6.8 Western because it's what the gun magazines and the online gun writers are touting as being the flattest shooting. And, you kill a deer at 6 or 7, 8, 900 yards, 1,000. Tell me this much. What's your bullet doing at that distance? As far as the bullet performing terminally? Is it opening up and expanding out that far to ethically kill a deer? If you can see one that far? How many of you hunt where you can see a deer that far away? Now, I'm in south central Kentucky, and on my property, and a lot of the properties I've hunted, 100 yards is an extremely long shot. I've threaded bullets through, squirrels are starting to move. I've threaded bullets through some thick stuff, when I knew I had the ability. The gun had the ability, I had the ability. My optic had the ability to put it where it needed to be, and I have killed deer, at 100, 150 yards through timber and undergrowth. But you have to be surgical, and you have to be ethical. And I've killed deer at 7 steps, 13 steps, 15 steps. When we are game hunters, we slow down, put more of ourselves into the sport. When we are game shooters, because we've been pampered by trail cameras, by commercial attractants, by taller deer stands, there's no thrill like killing deer from the ground. When you're down on their level in their territory and playing the game on equal footing with them, it's a whole new realm. I got into the same type of, not fight argument, but just back and forth argument with people over the years about black powder hunting. I had a guy tell me one time many years ago that he could kill a deer farther away with his inline than I could with my side hammer. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I've got an inline shooting pellets and sabots and or sabots, however you say it, however you decide to pronounce it yourself. To me, it's a sabot. And he had an optic on it, a scope, probably a 3x9 if memory serves. And he was claiming that his rifle would kill deer farther than mine would with iron sights on an old side hammer, half-stock gun. And I told him to prove it, because 100 grains of powder, whether it's pellets or loose, and I was shooting conicals, he was shooting, I think it was 240 sabots. Here was my argument. If you took a Sharps breech-loading buffalo gun, and let's just say it was a 45-70, that was a 45 caliber conical bullet, heavy for caliber conical bullet, and 70 grains of black powder. And they were killing buffalo and deer at extremely long distances. Heavy slug, 70 grain powder charge. If it was a 45-90, if it was a 45-120, if it was a 50-140, they were doing it back in the day, and it was heaving a big old slug a long way and shooting into an animal or an Indian pony or whatever it was they were shooting at. The point being, the range was there. It may have given him more confidence to have a scope and to have pellets in an inline rifle, but physics are physics. This much lead, this much powder, that distance, something's going to happen. And he probably killed deer well over 100 yards with his inline. And if you know the trajectory on your bullet and how your rifle's performing, you can do the same thing. You know, if you've got any, for years and years, people hunted deer every year, whether it was in Maine or Michigan or Texas or Arkansas or Georgia or Kentucky, with iron-sighted bolt-action rifles, lever-action rifles, pump-action rifles, semi-automatic rifles. Not everybody could afford a scope on their hunting gun, and they still kill deer every year. But we become pampered. I think, I'm not pointing fingers at any particular person, but I think as a whole, hunters these days have become inherently lazy when it comes to putting in the work. Not all of them. Some of them, you know, especially what I call the TV hunters that have sponsors and money coming in to pay for this, that, and other. But the common blue-collar, everyday working man, I think we've become pampered. You know, we want to run out after work, hunt an evening hunt. We want to get done with the work week and go out on a weekend. I will say this about the youngsters: a lot of them aren't getting up early enough to go out before daylight and get in the woods and get set up, you know, and be waiting when things start moving. When it's good shooting light, they're logger-headed sometimes. They want that instantaneous gratification, go out. And I've had quick hunts. I've got off work before and went out and been in the stand 30 minutes and had meat on the ground, you know. They're rare. Most of the time, you know, you can hunt all day and not see anything, or if you're selective, not see anything that you're wanting to put on the ground. There's not, you know, a stopwatch on a good quality hunt. You go out and you enjoy nature and creation, and you do what you do, and if one comes by, it's a blessing, and if it's got a real nice rack on it, it's a bonus. I've never been a bone hunter. I've killed my fair share of decent deer, but it wasn't because I had the latest, greatest, most popular caliber and the latest carbon fiber fluted barrel rifle that was new on the market this year. It was because I went out and I paid attention to things, and I watched scrape lines and rub lines and food sources. And good friend of mine, real good friend of mine at work, told me about a neighbor of his. I'm not going to mention names. It's comical, and it's kind of heartbreaking at the same time, but it kind of makes you chuckle. He moved into the area, and he wanted to start deer hunting. I don't guess he'd ever been doing much hunting, but he's living out in the country now, and he was going to go out and he's going to start deer hunting. And he went and bought him a new deer stand, and he put it up, and he was proud of himself, and he put out a corn pile, and because Baton's legal here in Kentucky, he come rushing over to this friend of mine's house across the road, and he's like, "Hey man," he says, "I put up a deer stand today." He said, "Me and my boy," he says, "and I want you to come over here and look." He says, "I hit a honey pot, a honey hole. As far as where I'm going to be hunting," he says, "it's perfect." He says, "I want you to come over and just look at this." So the little boy got on his side by side, and he drove over with him, and he showed him where to go. And he pulled up under this big old hickory nut tree, and this boy jumped out, and he was looking all around, pointing. He said, "Look at the deer, how they're eating all these acorns." He said, there's pieces of acorns everywhere where they've been eating these things. And my friend got to laughing. He said, "Man, them's hickory nuts." He said, "Them ain't acorns." He said, "Acorns ain't falling yet." He said, "And that right there is just cuttings." He said, "That's where the squirrels have been up in this tree eating these hickory nuts." He says, "No, it's deer doing it." He said, "I've seen some deer tracks through here too." He said, "Deer don't eat hickory nuts, man." He said, that's squirrels doing that." He says, "No, you don't know what you're talking about." He says, "This right here's where I'm hunting this year." And my co-worker's like, "Well, all right, go ahead, knock yourself out." You know, I hate it for him, because he's probably going to sit there and go crazy from the squirrels, you know, dropping cuttings on his head and running up and down the trees and stashing stuff and carrying on. But he honestly thought that all those hickory nut cuttings were from deer eating them acorns. People need to educate themselves. I'm not saying that the latest and greatest things that we're enjoying now in the sport are a bad thing. They're not. I use trail cameras myself. I use them for watching game movement. I also watch them for watching neighbor movement if they want to trespass. I use them for identifying things. from a security standpoint. I put out, a matter of fact, today I come down here, I'm filming in a different place than the last video. That one was taken up by the house alongside the driveway. This one's back in the creek bottom, where I've got a deer feeder for my granddaughter and a deer block put out. And I figured while I was back here, it'd be a good time to sit down on this 5-gallon bucket and share some thoughts with y'all. But now everybody thinks you have to have a big old screaming demon, fat cased hyper velocity deer gun to get anything done. And I could go back in my memory. I've killed deer. I'll admit it, I've killed deer with a .22 long rifle. When my kids were little, I mean, I was going to feed them no matter what I had. And sometimes you get down, you pay bills, you sell things to pay bills and keep food on the table and clothes on backs, because that's what dad does. I'm not proud of it, but I raised my kids to abide by game laws, and every now and then maybe I had to bend one to make sure that they were taken care of, and if that's a crime, then sue me. But I've killed them with 223 Remington, I've killed them with 22 250s, I've killed them with 7x57, I've killed them with 303 British, 308 Winchester, 45 Colt, 45-70. I mean, it goes on. 243, and all of them, they work. It doesn't have to be the latest and greatest. I'm not going to pay $80 a box just because somebody, had it on their channel as the newest, best thing, since sliced bread and white gravy. But if you put in the work and you're ethical and you're patient, I think it was in 98. I made a comment about 1998 before when I bought that Ruger pistol in the last video. But in 1998, I had traded for an old Mauser 98 pattern rifle that a local guy, an older gentleman that had built years ago, to groundhog hunt with. And it was a Douglas barrel, fully glass bedded one end to the other. It wasn't free floated. Fairly heavy barrel, short. I think it was a 20-inch barrel. Had a 4x12 on it. I traded for it. My neighbor across the road, we hunted together and cut firewood together, and we were friends. And then he asked me, he said, "What are you going to do with that thing?" I said, "I'm going to deer hunt with it. It's legal, center fire, any center fire caliber was legal by the book." And he said, "Well, you can't deer hunt with that. It's a groundhog gun." I said, "Well, I'm going to deer hunt with it and prove you wrong, because it's fully capable of doing it if you watch what you're doing and you're ethical and you take your time and you're patient, He said, "Well, you ain't going to." He hunted with a 243, a 7400 Remington automatic 243, semi-automatic. And he just laughed at me. He said, "You can't kill a deer with that. It's a groundhog gun." He said, "Them bullets will blow up on a deer." I said, "Well, we'll find out. I'm going to prove you wrong." And that November, I took it out, and I was sitting in one of my favorite stands. A little basket rack 7-pointer come through. He's probably 50 yards away. And I waited for him to bring that near side front leg forward, and when he brought that leg forward, kind of slinking through the woods, trailing a doe, he moved that front leg forward, and when he stretched it out, taking that long, slow, low step, he opened up that heart, and that's where I put it. It was right in behind that front leg, and he made a big half circle, ran around behind me, about a 50-yard arc. When he come by me, he was pumping a stream of blood as big as my finger, and he got out there in front of me and tipped me about 3/4 of a full circle and just tipped back over on his nose, and that was the end of that. Hold on a minute. All right, sorry about that. My wife called me on the radio. Where was I? Oh yeah, 22 250. Anyway, I got home and I told my neighbor, I said, "Hey, come out here and look at the back of the truck." He said, "What do you got?" And I said, "Come here." So he come shuffling out of the house, looked over the tailgate, and he said, "Well, Albie, did you kill that with that groundhog gun?" I said, Yep, sure did. And 55 grain ballistic tip run about 3,700. It went in right behind the leg between two ribs and knocked about a dime-sized hole out the hide on the other side, and that's all it took. Blew his mind. .223 to the neck, dropping stone dead many times. Honestly, the biggest caliber that I've killed one with, being a 45-70, was that deer. That last deer I killed with that Marlin 45-70 ran the farthest of any of them. About 40 yards in a straight line. I guess that buck ran farther, but he was in a big circle. He was dead, he just didn't know it yet. But just because you use a cannon, I'll tell you something else that causes. The same year I killed that deer with that 250, that 22-250, a buddy of mine, a co-worker, another one, Christmas of '97, I think it was, he was gifted a brand new Ruger 77 all-weather and 300 Winchester Magnum. He was on top of the world in that spring. He brought it to me and he said, hey, he said, me and so-and-so over here, another friend of ours, he said, we went out to sight this thing in. He says, and it's beating us to death. I said, well, if you can't tolerate the recoil, you're never going to shoot it well. And if you're never going to shoot it well, you're not going to be successful with it. And he says, well, I want you to sight it in if you will. He said, I'd like to have it about 3 inches high at 100. I said, where are you hunting? He says, well, over by the lake. I said, I'll put it anywhere you want it. I said, but it's kind of backwards for me to be sighting in your gun. He said, well, you go ahead and sight it in and I'll check it. He says, I don't want to. He says, we shot it 3 times. He says, I got a box of shells for it. He says, and me and Josh went out to sight it in. He said, and between the two of us, we shot it 3 times and just beating us to death. So I told him, I said, well, bring it tomorrow, put it in the truck. Bring me. I said, how many shells you got left? He said, 17. I said, well, bring me the rifle and bring me them 17 shells. Tell me how you want it zeroed. I said, and I'll see about doing it, and I'll bring it back. You can go from there. And he says, all right. And sure enough, he brought the rifle in, you know, proud as punch, with this nice stainless steel synthetic stock 300 Magnum. I think he was shooting 150 grain power points, if I recall. The old silver box Winchester power points. And after work that day that he brought it, I took it down to the farm that I was hunting at the time and set up my sandbags on the hood of the truck. And I had a tube sock. It was about 3/4 full of sand, and I laid it over my shoulder. And I pulled the butt of that rifle into that sand-filled sock and commenced to shooting it in. And I was curious how tight it would shoot at 100. So when I got it where he said he wanted it, and I can't remember, it might have been 1.5 inches high, I don't recall entirely, but I finished that 17 rounds. He weighed probably 190 pounds. The other guy was a little bitty feller, and at the time I weighed about $140. And I fired them remaining 17 shells that he had in that box, sighting it in and just shooting it to be shooting it, and I brought it back. And when I walked in, I guess he was expecting me to be black and blue and crippled and walking like I had the palsy or something, but I said, well, it's out there, we'll get it at dinner out of the truck, swap it back to your vehicle. I said, it's zeroed just the way you want it, and I gave him the target and showed him. He said, good grief, how many times did you shoot this thing? I said, well, how many shells was in that box? 17? He said, yeah. So that's how many I shot then. He said, well, what I owe you? I said, I burned up enough ammo. I said, I guess that's good for something, so we'll just call it square. I ain't going to charge you to do nothing like that. And that was the year I went out and killed a deer with a 22-250. Worked like a top. He took that new rifle and went and hunted a farm over by the lake, and he shot a doe with it. And I know he had to be flinching like crazy because he wasn't going to shoot it enough to zero it in. He sure wasn't going to practice with it. And the way he told me is he hit her low in the brisket. She was facing him head on, and he was pulling in on her chest head on, which was a bad shot with a 300. I've taken them before, but not with something that big. And he said that she jumped up, went nuts, took off, and when he went up there to see if there's any blood, he found a bunch of hair and a chunk of meat about half the size of your fist. And what he had done apparently was blowed out part of her brisket, hit her low, and again, a really nasty flesh wound, a suffering animal lost, and a failure on the part of the hunter by not doing his due diligence and putting in the work. So maybe some people would call that being lazy, maybe some would call it careless. I call it unethical. You don't need a cannon to kill venison in the South or the Mid-South or the Midwest. Trail cameras are handy. Attractants are handy. Cover scents are handier. Tree stands are handy. But when it comes down to it, going back, if you come from a long line of gatherers, hunter-gatherers, go back to your roots and do things the old way. If you have the chance to hunt them on the ground, hunt them on the ground. If that's not doable, whether it be from age, mobility, being handicapped, terrain, the environment that you're hunting in, if you can't, I mean, you're not going to hunt deer from the ground in an open pasture unless you're, really, really sneaky. But if you have the ability to go back and do it the old ways, the simple ways, number one, you're going to have a better feeling of accomplishment when it's over. You're going to realize what our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers contended with. And if you're new to hunting, if you start out and do it the hardest way, whether it's traditional archery and then you move to a compound, or whether you start with a side hammer kit that you had the pride in building yourself and then move up to an inline or a break action muzzleloader with a 209 primer. If you start with the most difficult platform and the most difficult hunting techniques, then you can grow from there. If you start out with all the modern amenities and all the tricks and the tools and the modern toys, what happens when you can't put your hands on those things? What happens when they wear out or quit working, or they fail to work, if a battery goes dead, or in a rangefinder, because you didn't plan ahead because you were lazy? Learn to do it the hard way and then grow into the modern era. If you start out in the modern era, you're handicapping yourself, because when you don't have those things, or if there's a time that comes where you can't obtain those things or maintain those things, having to go from that pinnacle in technology back down to the grassroots, bare bones level of attempting to bring in meat is going to seem almost impossible to you. That's why, to me, myself personally, black powder hunting is black powder hunting. If it was legal to wear buckskins instead of blaze orange, I'd be in buckskins. I have used Pyrodex, but to me it's side hammer Hawkins, long rifles, round balls if the caliber's big enough. If it's a smaller caliber rifle, perhaps a conical for energy reasons. But there's nothing any more peaceful to me than just sitting in the woods, even if I'm not taking game. If I see game, if I don't see game, I'm still out in creation, enjoying the Lord's nature that He provided and doing things the way our ancestors did. I've got modern high-powered rifles. I've got long-range precision rigs. I've got ARs. I've got, Picket. There's a version of it there somewhere in the safe, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty and actually going out and enjoying myself and having fun, to me, hunting should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be an anxiety exercise. It shouldn't be how much crap can I carry on my belt or in my backpack or fanny pack, or pull up in my deer stand, or drag out into the woods to make this thing happen. If you've got your weapon and a knife to field dress with, that's the bare bones right there. An implement to dispense a bullet and a knife to field dress with. When you can pull that off and you don't have to have the calls and the attractants and the trail cameras and the doodads. That's what it's about. That's just my opinion. It's kind of like going fishing with a cane pole. You go out and spend $300 on a reel and $250 on a rod. The fanciest new fishing line they've got out there, Super Line, running around in a $30,000 bass boat. And then some days you just want to sit on a creek bank with a cane pole, you know, and a worm or a cricket. And sometimes the simple things are just a lot more enjoyable. Slow down, take your time, and just watch the water roll by, watch a squirrel scamper by, and that's what we need to do, is just slow down, reflect a little bit, enjoy what we've got while we've got it, while we're here to do it. And they make for a lot more interesting stories too. I've got grandkids coming up, and I've got to practice my storytelling. I'd much rather tell a story about, yep, you see that rack right there, or you see that steak on your plate, this is how I done it. And just watch them sit there and spin a yarn for them and tell them how it all went down, you know. Well, no, I thought that's what it was, but I don't want to tell them I thought that's what it was, you know, but after I looked through my scope and I seen it, and then I shot it, and then I got up and I went over there, and then I had to fire up the ATV, and then I went over and I got my game winch, and I got my gambrel out, and got my cell phone out and took my selfies. And no, let's just, nah. Give me some feedback. I got to cut this short, need to get to the house, but I'll try to get another one out, and we'll talk about something else. If y'all don't give me any comments, I guess I'll talk about whatever strikes me. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. If you got anything out of this, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't get anything out of it, if you disagree with me, then tell me you disagree with me and tell me why. This is about communicating and spreading stuff around. So it can go both ways. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk to you next time.